Hello and welcome to our next session in the SURE Summer 2022 series. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research at the University of Saskatchewan. And I have the honor of actually presenting and hosting today. So if I miss, I'm going to try and watch for any chat questions that come in as I go along. But if you could save your questions till the end, then we'll make sure that we'll grab them. For those of you who are watching the recording afterward and you have a question, just make sure that you send me an email and I'm happy to help out. So today our session is how to read a journal article, which is something that all of us at some point in our academic life need to learn how to do. Journal articles are very different depending on where you're at. And some of you might be working on getting your information kind of outside of that, outside of sort of the academic parameters. And that's actually where we're going to start. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement first. So this is my own personal land acknowledgement as a settler Canadian of Scottish, Irish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Ukrainian tradition. I am filled with gratitude to live within Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I give respect to the First Nations and Métis of this place, not in the past, but in the present, and continually value our interconnectedness through Wahkutewin. I too love this land of vast skies and tall trees, Saskatoons and blueberries, and the swift and slow waters of the Saskatchewan River. I like starting with this to remind you that not all academic knowledge is to be found in published articles and peer-reviewed academic spaces. There is important knowledge to be gained in places outside of journal articles. So starting with this land acknowledgement reminds us to think and to think more broadly about where we find knowledge. But you're here because you're looking for any extra tips, tricks, hints, and ideas that I might have to get you through a big stack of journal articles in as fast amount of time and to get as much out of it as possible. So that's why we're here today. So there are sort of two reasons why you might be reading a journal article. Most of you are probably doing a literature review as part of your summer research project. And so this is each journal article becomes one of several sources for your paper or your project or your honors thesis or your summer project or whatever it is that you're working on. So you're looking for some extra guidance on how to identify, how to skim, how to sort, how to then piece your things together like a puzzle, and then how to put together that literature review and analysis. So think of this as a support session for the sessions that are coming from the University of Saskatchewan Library, specifically around literature reviews, where they break down how to do a literature review. This session is just a little bit more in depth to give you some ideas and supports on how to tackle an individual article, or how to tackle a pile of articles and get through them quickly. The second reason why you might be reading a journal article, some labs across USask and outside actually do a weekly or bi-weekly session where someone has to come and present on a particular journal article. You'll see this in medicine and in the health sciences, in vet med, in toxicology, and a few other spaces across campus. And you might be asked to present on a particular journal article sometime throughout the summer to the rest of your lab mates. And there's some specific techniques around that are also helpful. One of the reasons why those are done for a journal club or group project, that kind of thing, is because it's really hard. There's so much publishing happening all the time that it's absolutely not possible for everybody within a lab to stay on top of all the relevant research. And so by becoming part of a journal club of some kind, can actually shorten that process. They can listen to you. You've read the article, you've given that 10 or 15-minute presentation on the article. That either might give them enough to know whether or not they need to read it for themselves, or they'll say, okay, yeah, I'm aware of what that article says and its limitations. I can fold that into my knowledge and keep on going. And so that becomes a shortcut for other people as to whether or not they're going to read the journal article. In the past, in SURE, we've actually had journal clubs, undergraduate students who've wanted to put together a journal club and read articles and present them to each other to give themselves practice and skills in that. I am open to that idea, but I would need students to contact me as to whether or not they're interested in joining a journal club, and we can create one for the summer of 2022 if that's something that people are interested in. Okay, so with that kind of an overview, what I want to do next, and so so the way that I've structured today is that we're going to look at how to break it down if you have to read a whole bunch of journal articles for a particular project, and then at the end we'll talk about breaking down presenting on one article. So that's how I've structured today's session. I'm going to ask you guys at this moment, I've put it into the chat. So there's something called Padlet that we're going to use. And I want you to use GIFs to showcase how you feel when you have been asked to read a research article. So if you click on that link to padlet.com, and I'm actually going to stop presenting for a moment. And so if you can all hook into Padlet, and then I'll walk you through what to do then. In Padlet, there is on the bottom right-hand corner, there is a pink plus sign. If you click on that, and then there's sort of a hexagon that has 3 more dots that says more. Click on that as well. And then there's an option just on the bottom right for a GIF. So you can do a GIF and then you can do a search. And your search, I want you to think about what happens to you when you read a research article, especially, and I'm thinking in particular, a really complex, hard to understand research article. What do you feel like? Go ahead and find a GIF that works for you, and I'm going to put you what works for me, especially when I'm reading a science article, and yeah, and pop your GIFs in. I'm going to share the page so that you guys can all see them coming in. Take your time finding a GIF that you like. Oh, there's a patting yourself on the arm. That's a good one. Me, I'm the guy's like, yeah, because I'm a historian. So if someone asks me to read a science article, I'm completely confused. But sometimes I have to do it because I do write science history. So it can be a requirement. Have fun with that, and then you can have the Padlet open. I'm going to go ahead and share. Oh, yeah, I love that one of the little girl who's like, what is going on? It's perfect. So as you guys have a little bit of fun with that, I'm going to continue with my presentation. No, God, please, no. Yes, exactly. I agree. So we're going to start with, as I said, if you're doing a major literature search, as most of you are probably doing for your summer research project. And so we'll start with that one. You might need 20 or more articles as the basis for your paper or your project or your report. Padlet's quite fun, by the way. So I wanted to start with the art of skimming, reading to find what you need. Because you're going to do that search, you're going to follow the library's recommendations on how to do a search, but then how do you go from this search and this massive number of articles and actually figure out which ones are going to be useful to you? So this is the art of skimming. And the first issue is the more clear and focused your research question, the easier it's going to be to find out what you need. And there's ways to kind of work with that. And this is my best tool. You might be searching for something different. Most of you are going to be in that black section on the bottom left, results. You're looking to find who's researching this particular topic and what were their results. But others of you might be researching interdisciplinary, or you might be researching outside your discipline because you're looking for something like theory. And so maybe you're looking for theory and you want to know what's happening with a particular theory that you're going to be working with this summer, and you want to know what's happening, who has all engaged with it, what it looks like. You might be looking at methods, at methodology. And so you might be asked, because you're doing a research project this summer and you might be using a method that's new to you. So you want to find out, well, who else has used this method? How did they use it? What were their issues? So that you can kind of anticipate what might go well and what might go wrong with what you do this summer. So that's a very common one that people will, you might be researching outside your particular area of interest, but because that researcher is using the method that you're going to be using this summer, you might be needing to use their article or needing to read their article. Again, results definitely the biggest. That's the area. So within results, of course, that has to do specifically with whatever area you're particularly researching, where it's you're looking at how cells open and close because you want to you're researching MS or something like that. The last area is the smallest, but it's kind of that unicorn area, and that's an intervention. So let's say, for example, some researcher discovers that we need to eat 20 goji berries every day and we will never get cancer. That would be an intervention, right? And so that's an area where you could maybe do some research as well. And it might be sort of adjacent to your own research, but it might be slightly outside. But really having an idea of what you're searching for when you're searching, and you may need to be searching in more than one area, and that's okay too. But you may want to sort of separate your searches a little bit, and just so that you're specific on whatever day that you're searching. So really understanding what you're searching for gives you that sort of more narrow list of keywords to search. And please go back and watch the videos from how to conduct a literature search, because Angie Gerard gave some really great suggestions and examples of how to do a really robust literature search. But the better you know and refine your topic, this helps. What you might find, though, is that you do need to still be a little bit flexible as you find and sort of choose articles that you're going to read. So you're basically just doing your search and you're creating your pile of stuff that you're going to read. Get as specific as you can. The more targeted your topic and the more guiding your research question, the easier it will be to find articles. But if you can't find any articles, you might be too specific. So you might have to kind of widen your search a little bit. So you kind of need to go up and down depending on, because if you put in your search bar climate change, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to have literally hundreds of thousands of articles. If you're looking at climate change impacts on drought in Saskatchewan, that gives you some specific parameters, and then you can pull out something more specific. So those are some suggestions around on how to help. Next step, of course, to back up, yes, library workshops. So there are a number of library workshops over the past winter around refining your research topic, developing research questions, comprehensive searching for your literature review, finding and evaluating sources. All of these have tips and tricks as well that will help you. We've had past SURE program webinars as well, again, like the ones that have been recorded yesterday and last week around literature searches. Please feel free to use any of these to give you some extra tips and tricks. But what I really wanted to talk about is the art of skimming. When you're first doing that kind of initial, creating your pile, so to speak, don't read the whole paper. That is not the time to read the whole paper. You will be wasting your time if you do that. You're gonna start with the title. Does it relate to your topic or your methodology, or does it give you what you're looking for? If that's a no, skip. Like, that's obviously not going to end up in your potential pile. The second thing to read is the abstract. So is it likely to be useful? Most of the time you can read your abstract online before you even download it as a PDF to read later. So that's a really good thing to do. Make sure you've read that abstract, and is it likely to be useful? The only caution that I'll have here is that the abstracts and the title don't always pull up the methodology. They don't always give you enough of a robust piece of information around the methodology. So if that's specifically what you're looking for, be a little bit cautious about, tossing them away. Just make sure that you know what the methods are. But the third thing is to read the conclusion. If you think maybe that it's sort of where you need it to be, read their conclusion. Are their findings helpful, and do they match the abstract? Do they match the what you thought it was going to be about? If not, then probably skip or put it into like the secondary maybe pile. I've done that too. Yeah, so sometimes I have more than one. And when I say pile, I'm old fashioned. I used to print up all my PDFs of all the papers that I was going to read. Now I just have like a virtual pile. Like this is my A pile, this is my potential pile, and this is my I'm not 100% sure yet pile, but I'll get to it maybe if I need to. So yeah, that's how I do it. So when you're doing that reading, starting with the abstract is very key. And sometimes that's all you need to read of an article, so that really helps. But is it relevant to your research, your topic, your question, or methodology? Does it fit where you want to go? Does it add a useful dimension? Does it challenge you? Does it challenge where you think or where your lab is going? That's actually a good article to read, because if it's completely contrary to what you understanding of where your research should be going, and it takes you in a totally other direction, definitely, hook that one in and think about, okay, maybe I'll read that one further. But if at any point after reading the article, you're like, now this has nothing to do with where I need it to go, stop. Absolutely stop. Do not waste any more time on it. This is where you start to do that sort of your A pile, your B pile, your C pile. So which articles are giving you, the topic, the abstract, the conclusion. It's like, yeah, this is something I think I'm going to need to read. You're also going to start thinking about the timing of it. Was it published in 1952? Well, if you're a historian, maybe that's a good thing. But if you're a scientist and it wasn't published within the last 5 years, that might be a trigger problem for you, right? So think through when it was published, pay attention to that. And again, most interesting perspective, most adversarial perspective. If they disagree with what's happening in your lab, definitely that would be one to keep in your pile for further reading. And any future research directions. So if somebody's doing something that's really avant-garde, or if taken your gone in a really weird or interesting direction, maybe set that one aside for future reading. And this is where you're going to start to see what I call the sorting. And this is actually the beginning of analysis, but you're like, yeah, this article, there are these 3 articles. Yeah, I got to read those ones in more depth. These ones, well, maybe, but so you're starting to sort within your piles. You still haven't read any of these articles all the way through yet. You're still in that sorting process. Which ones are more useful, which ones are less useful. You're also starting to piece together things like a puzzle. And when you do a puzzle, there's always 2 things going on. You're at the detail level of fitting this piece with this piece with this piece, but you're also always working at that large scale level, right? You're always thinking about, what's the overall picture? What is this going to look like? What do I need it to look like? Am I working on the right puzzle, sort of thing. So a puzzle's an interesting analogy, because you're always working at multiple levels, and even within, right? Like, I'm going to work over here on all the blue pieces of the sky. So like, I'm working on the methodology and all the stuff that goes with that. And then over, maybe later I'll work on, something else, but it all fits together eventually. But yes, the fitting together part is where we go next. So then, okay, so you've kind of started to sort your piles, and then you need to kind of dive in a little bit more. So you're scanning the big headings. So maybe you've got 10 or 15 papers in that sort of must read pile. Then you can start to dig in a little bit more and start to read them a little bit in more depth. You're still not going to read the whole thing, but you're just going to dive in just that next level. So you're going to start to pay attention to their methods, their visuals, take a look at their charts and graphs, their headings, their key points. Which pieces relate to your research question? Are you interested in their methods or their argument or their data or their conclusions? This is another factor of the sorting, but you're scanning the big headlines to see what you understand and what you don't, and what kind of fits and what's like, maybe that'll fit, but I'll leave that one till after. It might fill in a gap later, but for right now, okay, this one's got meat, this one's got this one's important. So that's part of what you do. Always, when you're doing these literature searches, you're always going to end up finding more articles than what you're actually going to end up using. You will still, even at this process, even though you're starting to kind of read past the abstract, reading the headlines, reading sort of first and last sentences of each section, these sorts of things, you'll still reject. You'll still be like, yeah, no, I don't need to dive any further into that article, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine. The next thing to dive into, sort of you've taken a look at sort of the overall structure, the charts, the graphs, kind of, okay, I think I see where it's going. Then the lit review. This really helps you to refine your thinking on the topic and on your own research question, because they're doing what you're going to need to do, right? So they're introducing their article, their research work, and situating it within that larger context. And then their conclusion should, if they match, they don't always, they should, but they don't always. The conclusion summarizes and often gives next steps. And so you can, and sometimes those next steps might be exactly what your research is, right? So you can say that in your lit review. So-and-so said that the next logical step in this area of research is exactly what I'm doing this summer, right? So that's very handy when these sorts of things happen, because they're your lights, they're your guideposts and showing you the way. They're also showcasing what you ought to probably be reading next, and we'll get to that in a second as well. So with that, you've kind of got, a good pile of articles, you've read them through, you've read their abstracts, you've read at least the lit review, you kind of have a pretty good idea of what's happening with them. So you've got sort of that smaller pile that you're going to dig into in more depth. This is where you start bringing out your pen and paper or your Excel spreadsheet, and you start reading deeper. Because the secret of analysis and the secret of a really good literature review is asking questions and taking notes. So now that you've kind of done sort of the brain dump kind of stuff, and you've got it sort of whittled down just from your online, you've got your PDFs, you've got them downloaded, you've got them set and ready to go, and actually to read all of the articles, this is where you need to either take out a pen and paper and do it the old-fashioned way with highlighters and kill some trees. That's fine. I'm a historian. I understand this, or you can do it fully online, create some kind of an Excel spreadsheet, something that you can use to keep track of what you're writing and your thoughts on your writing, or on your reading. Pardon me, reading and writing go together, so I sometimes mix up the words. But the notes that you take on those articles is actually your beginning analysis, because then you don't have to go back and oh, where did I read that about, whatever. And so the better your notes, the easier you're going to make it on yourself. So I suggest that you make notes on each article, but you can do it within an Excel spreadsheet so that you can kind of have categories of what you read, and that's fine. Or you can just do, a word on each one, and that's fine too. Whatever works for you, find a system that works for you and stick with it. Do it for every article. High recommend on that. Don't do it for the first 3 and then get lazy like me. Don't be Merle. Don't do that. The secret to these things, this sort of beginning analysis and really interacting, because this is a conversation. You're having a conversation with the researcher. They've kind of presented it as this is what I did, and they're trying to engage you, and they're trying to tip you over to what their way of thinking. So you're engaging with it. So the best way to do it is to ask questions. Who wrote it? When did they write it? Why did they write it? Who funded it? Where was it published? So that kind of basic, the stuff that will go into your references, right? So that's important. And then what were they responding to? So that's what you get out of their literature review. That's why you've read it so far. What are they responding to? Well, they're responding to these questions and these issues, and this is why they're writing it. And then what was their research question? What was their hypothesis? What was their thesis? So what was their question that they were asking? What methods did they use? So you can break that down. You can be as deep or as high level. It was a mixed methods review, and maybe mention which mixed methods they used, or it was a large scale meta-analysis, or it was a very focused reading of one particular document. Maybe it was a historian who found something in the archive that no one else had looked at. What methods did they use? What were their findings? Now, just remember that their findings are separate from their conclusion. So their findings are because your conclusion is what their analysis of it and taking it to their next detail, but their findings, so if they were in a lab and they had particular results, so that's their findings. And then what was their conclusion? Does their conclusion make sense to you? Did you believe it? Were you convinced? What were What were the areas where you still had questions? Because again, like I said, this is you having a conversation with that particular text, with that particular journal article. And what unanswered questions do you have? So what are their gaps? What are their holes? And believe me, they have them. Everybody does. So yeah. I also like to capture good quotes, especially as a historian. I use a lot of quotes in my work. So if there's something that really stands out and I know that I'm probably going to want to actually quote it, then I'll make sure that I, copy and paste and put that right in. Or, put some kind of note taking around, if I need quotes on this sort of argument, there's some good things to reference here, that kind of thing. Maybe it's a really loquacious article. So I try and make notes of that. So this, like I said, up to this point, now you're finally reading the whole article. You've got your top pile and you're engaging specifically and deeply with each one. You're asking those questions. And I've set this as sort of the analyze and synthesize, because as you're asking those questions, these are the big five that you want to make sure that you're coming out of the article and that you really understand. So we call them the 5 C's. So category, what kind of article it is, the context, where does it fit into their larger, research thing. Correctness, basically, is it valid? Did you agree with it? Did you believe it? Yeah. Do you think that they did it well? Where do you think the matches and the mismatches are? Contributions. So what did it add? What did it add both to your thinking and what did it add to the larger context within your particular discipline? And clarity. And this is actually one of the secrets. If you're reading a research article and you have to read the same paragraph 3 or 4 times because you can't understand it, that's not a reflection of you not being a good enough or smart enough reader. That's a reflection of their writing. And that's a really problematic problem within academia overall. There's this thing about, wanting to sound smarter than you are. But what it means is that the articles that are cited the most are the ones that people can read and understand the first time they read them. It's like, oh, they just made this so clear. That's why those articles get cited all the time. So that their clarity of thought and their clarity of how well they've convinced you is a high indicator of how good the article was written. When I say confidence, so I really do want you guys to remember that your engagement with that particular journal article or that stack of journal articles does matter, because they need to, every time you write a journal article, they need to be able to talk to a huge audience, not just the few 500 people across the world in this one particular corner of the discipline who will understand what they're saying. They need to be able to engage, each article needs to engage with everyone and kind of bring everyone along for the walk. So to say that they didn't do that, by all means, that's a valid criticism, and feel free to say that. Also, what you bring, your reader response to the article is just as valid as someone else's. So yeah, just wanted to boost your confidence a little bit on that. If you're in a hurry, if you've been given the task of coming up with 10 top papers, by tomorrow, my best tips are to just read the first and last sentence of a paragraph or a section. Like if you don't have time to read the whole article, every word, and take detailed notes, this is your snap way to do it. Read the first and last sentence of every paragraph or every section. Do your best to understand the graphs and charts and images. That might take you a few minutes longer, especially if you're me. I don't speak graph, I don't speak chart, I speak photograph and map. Those are my languages. Graphs and charts don't speak to me. I have to really work at it. Watch for citations. So that's another thing. If you're reading strategically and you're in a big hurry to do a pretty robust but really fast literature review, their citations are your roadmap. That is the latest, usually the best and the latest research in the area. And so then you can see what they referenced, pull those ones and see what matches what you need it to be. that was just like a pause. If you're in a big rush, these are my best practices. But if you've got that time to really invest in it and dive into each of those, 10 or 15 or 20 articles, as you're sorting and thinking, I write to discover and to understand. So I've actually recorded hunches, I've recorded random thoughts, I've created diagrams of which article kind of relates to what, especially if I've already read 5 or 6 and then I want to know, well, how do they relate to each other? I say chart the begats. I don't know if any of you come from a Christian background, but there's a whole book in the Bible that's like so and so begat so and so begat so and so begat so and so. Academia actually is like that. The big researcher begat this other big researcher who begat a whole bunch of graduate students and other researchers who went on to take jobs. Academia is a whole series of begats, and journal articles can be that way as well, because published journal articles will kind of interact with each other. And so then you can kind of draw some charts and maps around what's referencing what. And it actually works out really well. This gives you some vocabulary around how the papers talked to or reacted to each other, and people really value your thoughts on that as well. So those are really good for literature reviews. So, and also criticize. Feel free to say, like this I wasn't convinced, or the data didn't match the conclusions, or whatever it is. So as you're writing and doing these notes and doing this jotting and note taking, you can record those hunches and the criticisms and various random thoughts. And these actually go a long way towards when you sit down to write up your literature review, you've got 3/4 of it written already. So that's the secret. Again, going back to that, the roadmap, the references. So every published article is nested within and references a whole bunch of other published articles. So that becomes your roadmap and your guide. So if you're looking for research articles and your keyword search didn't turn anything up, but you're sure that there should be research in that area, pay attention to the couple of articles that you did find. What did they reference? And maybe your keyword search was just a little bit off, and there actually is a bunch of stuff out there that you need to know about. So academia is that sort of larger conversation. It's sort of 2 levels. It's you having a conversation with each article, but then you're also figuring out how each article talked to and related to all the other articles kind of around it. So it's lots of conversation. When you get down and you've got all these different notes, you've got jot notes, you've thought about how everything kind of fits together, this is where your synthesis comes in. So this is where you're going to sit down and actually write your literature review, which we're going to talk about next week. Jill McMillan has a really great session on how to write up your literature review. So I'm not going to go over that. She's going to delve into that, but I kind of look at it this way. So it's your individual notes, your cross notes, what relates to what, puzzling it all together, and it comes out as your conclusion. So that's kind of the way that I think about it. Sort of the individual notes, the positives, the negatives, your interaction with each one, then you're piecing it all together. How did they react to each other? And then your outcome, of course, is your synthesis, is your literature review. Notes, compare notes, put it together, and report. Okay, we're gonna have a rest. Anyone else want to add anything to the Padlet and the GIF? I'm going to share the screen as it is right now. It's quite fun. A lot of confused, yeah, it's like, reading a research article is not known as the best way to spend your time sometimes. Try and be as refreshed as you can. Try and make your physical space as not too inviting, because you'll fall asleep, but still, like, a cup of tea, cup of coffee, maybe, a blanket over your legs so you don't get cold. Whatever it is that you need to do to make your environment as conducive as possible. Also pick the best time of the day when your brain is as fresh as you can, and that'll be different for each of you. Some of you might be night owls, some of you might be freshest in the morning, but if you know that you have to read a research article or a whole bunch of them, 4 or 5, do the best you can to make sure that your environment is as conducive to that as you can be. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my main presentation screen. And away we go again. So this is where I'm going to shift gears from reading reading a whole bunch of articles and how to piece it together to reading just one article. So this is when you have to dive deep into just one article and present just on that one article. Some of you may have to do it this summer. There's a lot of things around this that might come in useful if you even if you have to read a pile of articles, but this is more geared towards that if you just have to read one. The secret of analysis is still taking notes. So asking those really active questions. Who wrote it? Why? Who funded it? When was it published? Where was it published? You know, what was their methodology? You know, what kind of a study was it? You know, all of these sorts of that very active questioning, that is still the secret of analysis. So make sure that you're doing that. If you're going to give a presentation, this is how I generally break it down, a presentation on one particular article. Usually you want to start with sort of the larger picture and background. So where does the article fit? What's its context? Why are you reading it? So sometimes you've been asked to read it. Don't mention that. Oh, my supervisor said I had to read it. Not a recommended way to say it. This was a great article. Thanks for recommending it. And what big issue does it address? So that larger picture, always kind of start there, and it helps to settle your audience as well, so that they kind of have that larger picture of where this article is situated within the larger discipline. And then the rationale and the objective. So why did they do this particular research? What was the rationale, and what was their purpose? What was their objective? What were they trying to do? So these are interrelated questions, but still slightly separate. What was their rationale and what was their objective? And then what was their research question? What was their hypothesis or thesis? So what's the question being addressed? And then this is also where your criticism can come in. Was it clear? Was it easy to understand? Was it a good question to ask? Always a good thing to, like, is it even worthwhile? You've already had to read it, you're presenting on it, so I hope it was worthwhile, but sometimes it's not, and it's okay for you to say so. Methodology. This is an interesting one for me as a historian when I work with social scientists and scientists, because this is like, they always want to know my methods, and me, I'm like, I went to the archive and I read the documents that were in the box that, you know, related to my project, or I read the newspaper article. Anyways, methodology is an interesting, very discipline specific conversation, but basically how did they set up, how did they conduct the data collection, what were their parameters? And then, were their methods clear? Were they biased? Why did they choose that particular technique? Advantages, drawbacks, limitations. These are all, again, that going back to that active questioning, this is where you start to really dig into what they did and if they did a good job or not. So what's the methodology? And then, of course, their findings, which is different than their conclusion. I'm going to say that again. What were, and you don't have to explain all their findings. Usually, if you're just giving a presentation, you can kind of maybe highlight their top 2 findings. That's okay. If you have to give like a presentation, like a PowerPoint, and then you're going to like PDF some of their data and figures and charts to showcase the results, that's fine, as long as you're not then publishing it to the internet, because that's someone else's research. So if you're just showing it in your lab group, that's fine. What was particularly noteworthy, surprising, and was the data fully explained, or was there something that they didn't account for, random or out of place? Maybe it made sense in their brain, but it doesn't make sense in yours. And that's perfectly reasonable for you to call them on it as well. And then their conclusions. Some, again, you're presenting to your lab mates, you're giving them their conclusions, and then you can say, did it line up with the question, with the methods, with the results? You know, did you agree with it? Was it convincing? Why or why not? And then the next obvious question, and there's 2 layers to this as well. What did they think are the next logical steps. Oftentimes that's in a conclusion. They will say, you know, what their own gaps are and where they'd like to research next. But you can also say, this raises a question for our lab. Maybe we could, you know, do some work in this area and fill out this gap. So sometimes you can kind of use these things to set the direction of where your research team needs to go. And also just what other questions did the article raise for you? I always like to do a bit of a final summation and critique. So this again is that overview. So you've read the article in depth. You've talked about what worked in the article. You talked about what didn't work in the article, conclusions, next steps, and then initiating that conversation with the other people in your lab. So that's really what presenting on a single article, journal article, is meant to do, is to spark that larger conversation within your lab by your colleagues. And that's it. And then you finish. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to stop the recording, and then I will open the floor to any questions that you might have. And for those of you who have been along for the ride, you'll know that our recordings all get put up onto our Sure website as quickly as I can get them there.